Hey everyone! If you're like me, those perimenopause symptoms are driving you crazy. Well, I've got a little help for you. All you need to do is go to my midlifewithcourage.com website, and a little box is going to pop up that's going to ask you if you'd like to get my free ebook called Balancing Your Hormones. It's a short little guide with tips that you can use throughout the day, super easy, to help you balance out those hormones through the things that you do. So check it out, midlifewithcourage.com. Now let's get back to the show. You're listening to the Midlife with Courage podcast. This is where women come each week for inspiration, motivation, and sometimes a little education to help them flourish after 40. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Midlife with Courage. I am Kim Benoit, your host. Today, I have a beautiful guest with me. Her name is Lynn, and I forgot to ask her how to pronounce her last name, so she'll have to share that with us first. So, hi, Lynn. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey Kim, it's Golodner, and everybody hacks it apart, so I appreciate you asking.
I was going to say Golodner, but then, yeah, so, oh
I've been
well.
called everything, so it's all good.
Tell us what we need to know about you. Where in the world are you, and more about what you do.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm based in Detroit, and I have always been a writer since I was 6 years old, but I worked as a journalist for a long time and then as a marketing professional, and I still do that. I have a marketing company here in Detroit, and I serve just a handful of clients around the world because about 5 or 6 years ago, I pivoted to focus on writing books. So from 1996 until 2013, I had 8 books published, but they were sort of labors of love, projects on the side that I just wanted to keep my hand in the craft of writing. And that included 2 poetry collections and 6 nonfiction books. But I always wanted to write fiction. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, I decided maybe it was a midlife crisis, I don't know, but I said I was going to shrink my business and really focus on writing novels. And I've taught English and writing for the past, oh God, I don't know how many years. And I decided to ramp that up so that I was really in the writing space in everything I did. And since then, I've published 2 novels and 1 collection of personal essays. And I have a third novel coming out this summer.
Wow, that is impressive. And oh,
Thank
I
you.
totally want to get into that, but I want to ask my question first. When was a time in your life that you felt very courageous or you showed courage?
Ooh, I think I've had a few, but I decided to leave my first marriage when my kids were very little. They were 1, 3, and 5 when I filed for divorce, and that was really scary. Also because I was a freelance journalist, and that was around the time of the economic recession. And so it was like a perfect storm. And my ex-husband is a musician, very talented, but not, I couldn't rely on him for income or anything. And so I just had to sort of take a leap. And I did. And I started a company, really pulling on my journalism skills, my communication skills. And it ended up becoming marketing and public relations, but I had no idea what I was doing. And I didn't know if anybody would come on as a client. And thankfully they did. And it paid off in time, but it was a pretty scary time. I was in a house that was basically underwater, and I had these little kids, and so I just had to hope and pray that I wouldn't end up at my parents' door and say, take us in. And I worked really hard, morning, noon, and night, and it paid off. But it was a scary time. I
I,
definitely needed courage then.
I bet for sure. Yes, that is very courageous. That's amazing. So much there. So much to talk about. So, why writing? Why do you like to write?
That's a really great question. I've always written, and I feel like I've done it to make sense of things, like to figure out what I think, and just to sort of take my time in communicating. Like if we have an argument, I'm not going to have good responses until an hour later when I've had time to process. But when I'm writing, I take the time with it, and I really think about the words, and is this the best word, or should I put a different one in, or whatever. And so it allows me time to process and to play a little bit. There's a lot of creativity in it, and finding the best word is just like a challenge. And so I write really to understand the world and myself,
Mm.
but also to start a conversation with others. So when I'm writing, especially when I write creative nonfiction essays, I put them out in the world, in literary journals and magazines. And I do want it to be a two-way street, a conversation with readers, share my perspective, but maybe it also helps them to think about their lives in a different way. And we can connect over that. And so I think in a way, writing, while it's a very solitary experience, builds community and connection too.
Hmm. I love to write too, and I would love someday to write a book or something, publish, but I'm just not there yet. So
I'll get there. You can
I'll
do
get
it.
there.
I believe in
Yeah, I love writing. You can create, and I love that you have to think about, at least I do, I have to think about what words to use,
you. Right.
and I'll catch myself writing a whole bunch of stuff, and then I read it later. I'm like, oh, that's not what I meant.
Right. Right. Yes.
But you have the time to go back and look and change it if you want to.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
always tell my students that writing is 80% revision. So there's like the creation phase, but then
Oh.
I spend a lot more time making it better. And that also makes me feel like even if the first round is pretty messy and not great, there's time and I can make it better. And that also, it's like you don't fail. You just keep working at it until you think it's polished enough to send out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I noticed too, I was going through your website and reading more about you, and you said you wanted to do a book per year.
Yes.
That is very ambitious.
It is, but you know what happens? The more you write, the more you write. And so,
Uh,
and I've really like made a nuisance of myself to lots of better established writers and asked advice and they've said things like the best thing you can do when you're waiting for a book to come out is start on the next book because it then you're not depending on that one book to be everything. So it's almost like a distraction, but then you're working on another book and so it's like this pipeline. So my first novel came out in September 2023. And then before it launched, I started working on the next book, which came out in August of 2024.
mhm.
And I did the same thing. I just took their advice and I repeated it.
Uh,
So what's interesting is I decided to put together a collection of my essays into a book, which then came out in January of 2025. So not even a year. And I was working on, I didn't really have to write that because they were already written, the
sure.
essays. I started working on the next book. It is this pattern. And the next novel, like each novel I've written it faster because I'm perfecting my skill.
Mm.
And so I have another novel coming out in June of 2025. So that's really four
Wow,
books in 2 years, just under 2 years,
that's
which
amazing.
is pretty amazing. And I never would have, I didn't like really kill myself to do it. And so it was like, oh, I'm just having fun with it. And it's just getting easier because I'm doing it more. And
Hmm.
so that's a really pleasant surprise too.
Sure. And you're passionate about it. I can hear it. I can see it. And isn't it easier to do things that you're passionate about?
100%. Yes, I have 4 kids, and one of my kids, he's super smart, and if he's not interested in something, he's just not going to do it. And so, like, I remember he already graduated high school, but when he was in high school, he's like, "Oh, I'm just not good at this." I'm like, "No, no, no. It's just that you're not interested." And he's like, "Yeah, that's true." Like when you really want to do something, you jump into it, and when you
Oh,
don't, it's like you keep putting it off.
yeah. That's such a good way to look at it, a good mindset too. Because,
Yeah,
I'm not good at it. It's very negative, but no, you're just
right,
not interested. It's
right.
not your
And
thing.
Right. And sometimes we have to do things that we're not interested in, and so we have to figure out a way. But
Yeah,
maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should do the things that interest us because then we'll do them well.
exactly. Yeah. I love doing podcasts, but, I just do it.
There you go. It's
So there
easy,
we
right?
go.
It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So you switched from, you said nonfiction to fiction. You kind of in midlife, you kind of mentioned that. I want to talk about that a little bit. Why do you think you did that? What
So
was
you know
it?
what's funny, Kim? I tried writing fiction several times in my career, and the first time that I wrote a full novel, a very bad novel, was in the year 2000. So I was 29 maybe, and I wrote this novel, and I don't know, it was okay. Like I don't think it'll ever get published, but I think that I needed to mature as a person and also in my skills in order to have the patience to write a novel. I think, creating a world and creating characters with their lives and everything, it takes patience and it takes some maturity. And I just think I couldn't do it until I was in my late 40s. And the first novel that came out, Woman of Valor, I had actually started writing, I don't know, 10 years earlier, and I wrote like 60 pages. And then I just sort of got frustrated and lost focus and I abandoned it. So I went back to it, but I had to really start over. Like I liked the concept, but I needed to, get deeper with it. And I think that it was just those 10 years made a huge difference. And I finally knew myself and knew what it took to write a novel
Mhm.
and had the patience to stick with it, which I don't think I had when I was younger.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm finding that's an acquired, what is it? An acquired attribute myself. It's, yes, patience is something that I've had to work on too. But so it kind
Yeah.
of sounds like your life experience helps you in your writing and helps probably make you a better writer. Is
I
that
think so.
accurate?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think you just learn a lot about yourself and about the world and about how people interact. And really, stories are about people, they're about relationships, about experiences. And so once you've had more and you've been able to reflect on it, you can bring that reflection, that insight into the page. And then it adds more depth and understanding to your stories, which I think readers appreciate. And I think if you're not introspective, if you're not reflective, then your characters won't be. And so, how much depth can there be? It's funny. One of my favorite writers is Diana Gabaldon, who wrote Outlander, and she is today in her 70s. She wrote the books like she started writing the books in the late 80s. So I don't know how old she was then, but her later books have this depth. And I think it's because she was already older when she started, and then she was much older. Like she's working on book 10 now and she's in her 70s. So
Wow.
I think that's really helpful when you're a reader, you get that richness in the story because
Yeah.
the writer themselves has evolved into that stage of life.
Hi, everyone. Kim here. I just wanted to remind you that I have a brand new product on my online shop at midlifewithcourage.com. They are beautiful affirmation cards just for you. These are a product that I created. I'm very proud of them. They're called your Daily Dose of Courage. Each day you take a card and you can go in order. They are numbered 1 through 31 for each day of the month, or you can just take them out at random. Use them just to give yourself a little positive message. Maybe you want to use them as a journaling prompt. You can even use them in the evenings before you go to bed as a way of just having a little positive, courageous message to read before you go to sleep at night. So go to midlifewithcourage.com and go on the online shop. The link is right there on the first page and grab your copy of your Daily Dose of Courage affirmation cards. Sure. Yeah. You bring what you know into it and then share that. And yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I noticed now the Forest Walk on a Friday is the collection of
Yes.
essays and things.
Yep.
And I saw three topics that are kind of in there. Midlife romance is one of them, and
Uh-huh.
then religion, and then connecting with nature. So
Yeah.
can we talk about those little topics? I love the
Yeah.
midlife romance one.
Yes, so I am very fortunate that after my divorce, a few years later, I met another wonderful man who I have been married to now for 14 years
Ah,
and been with him almost 16 years. So the second chance, I mean, talk about maturity. Like I think I needed, I always wanted to get married and I wasn't obviously very good at the relationships until later. And I think it was that maturity and that introspection that also allowed me to be in this relationship and him too. He had a first marriage that didn't work out also. And I just think we enjoy each other more and more the longer we're together. And so there are a lot of essays about the decision to leave the first marriage,
mhm.
which I think takes maturity and courage because it's scary to go out there on your own. And then the idea of meeting someone new, like I think about it now, if I had to find someone new at this point, I'd be like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Like I'm pretty lucky that we found each other and that our kids melded really well. And so there's a lot of that informs those stories too, which
Yeah.
are happy endings, I guess.
Right, right. Yeah. I've talked to a lot of women, and a lot of them have the same courage stories where they chose to leave a long-term relationship. And it does take a lot of courage, like we said before. But as someone who's been married for 36 years
Oh, that's
or
amazing.
coming up on 37, I'm like,
Uh-huh.
there are times. But
Yep.
I can't imagine like having to start over at this point or
No.
even like 10 years ago. Like,
Yeah. I do feel like I think I needed to gain confidence in myself and like be okay being alone in
mhm,
order to find such a good relationship and
mhm.
so I think that's what the divorce taught me and I was pretty happy with myself when I met Dan and I think that has energized our relationship too.
Sure, sure. That makes everything in your life better if you're okay with yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the religion. I know you've had some writings about that. And do you want to talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm Jewish and I'm very proudly Jewish. I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm religious. I think in Judaism, you can be cultural and religious, and I've been every denomination that exists in Judaism. I was raised Reform, which is pretty secular. I spent a decade in the Orthodox community, which is pretty religious. And I left that when I left my first marriage, and I'm somewhere in the middle. It's a denomination called conservative, and it's sort of the best of both worlds. And I really, really love our synagogue and love our community, but I feel like I have had this sort of transformation Jewishly throughout my life, come to understand it more and what resonates with me, and also gained confidence and independence on, my own identity. Like I do what's meaningful to me and I don't do what isn't, even if it's dictated, by someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, I mean, Jews are 0.2% of the world. Like we're tiny, tiny, tiny,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's like it's actually there's like an apparel company that sells like shirts that say 0.2, which I haven't bought, but I'm sort of tempted. I think that's kind of cute. So yeah, like we're such a minority, and a lot of people really don't like us. And so it's
Oh,
it's tough going. And I feel like it's a courageous decision to still embrace such a minority identity and be proud of it. And
sure.
I'm connected to ancestors and traditions that are really beautiful, and I really appreciate my identity. And so I do write a lot about it. And yeah, it's interesting. There are some places that don't really want essays about Jewish identity.
Really?
Yeah, it's gotten a little tough out there in the publishing world, but there are still a lot that will take essays and pieces. And so when I decided to write novels, I made a deliberate decision to incorporate into my author brand Jewish identity. So like the first novel is about an Orthodox Jewish woman, and so it's very much a religious focus.
Mhm.
The second novel, Cave of Secrets, nobody's religious, but the ancestral identity is there.
Right.
And so that is something that comes up, and people sort of learn about like the cultural aspects and like they explore it. But it's like, what is this? It takes place in Scotland and there's romance and all that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
which is really fun. And being Jewish is there, but it's not like a central theme.
Yeah.
And in my new novel coming out also, it's even less so, but it's still threaded through. And I made that decision because I felt like it would be great to have more stories with positive Jewish representation. And
Hmm.
so it finds a way into my writing somehow. And in the essay collection, there's a fair number of essays about like making my grandmother's chicken soup, and
Yeah.
how she, conveyed the recipe to me when I lived away, so like when my father died, like sort of those mourning traditions and different ways that it sort of shows up in my life. And so that's definitely threaded through that book too.
Yeah. Well, it's part of you. So it's natural that it would come out in your writings and you'd want to write more about it too.
Yeah.
And I, like you said, 0.2%, I didn't realize the number was that low, but that makes sense to me because I probably grew up with one Jewish person and where I live. And
Yeah.
so I don't know much about the Jewish culture and religion, but I'd like to learn, so I'll have to start learning.
Yeah,
So,
I'll tell you that a lot of people, like my books are not just for Jewish people. And
right.
I spoke to a book club of women, nobody was Jewish, and they were reading the first novel, Woman of Valor, and they loved it. And they had all these questions. And actually, the woman who hosted there's a lot of food in that book, made some of the recipes. And so they were eating like matzo ball
Oh,
soup. And, it was really cool. And I don't know about you, but when I read novels, I love learning about different cultures and different identities that I know nothing about. And
right.
so I sort of aim to put that into my writing too, because I feel like it's a way that we can, come closer together with other people and build
Sure.
understanding. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, for sure. So when you write a book about whatever it happens to be, if it's something that people probably aren't familiar with, how do you teach them without teaching? You
Yeah,
know what
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, listen, I teach a writing class called Demystifying Show, Don't Tell. So one of the mantras that writing teachers say is show, don't tell. And everyone's like, great, how do I do that? And so I teach a class on it because I think that when you can bring the reader into the scene, like with details or dialogue or sensory descriptions, then the reader gets it. So if I'm going to write about Shabbat dinner or Sabbath, and I just tell you, and you're like, I really don't know what any of this is, then it's
Mhm.
really distancing. But if I describe what the bread tastes like, or how I made the bread, or what the candles sound like when I light them, and then, like describe the brass candlesticks that my great great grandmother brought over from Europe when she emigrated, like you're there with me. And so I think the best way to do that is to be descriptive so that you set a scene that the reader can be in with you. And then they're like, oh, okay, I get it. I can smell the aromas. I can, hear the voices and whatever. And so I think that's the key, really, to bringing
Sure.
people to the page. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That's talent too, to be able to do that, I think.
All in the revision, right? The
Yeah.
80% is making
Yeah.
it better. Yeah,
For sure. For sure. Do you think anyone can write? Do you think anyone can learn
absolutely.
to write? Maybe it would be the better question.
Yeah, I do. I had somebody ask me a few years ago if in any of my classes I would ever tell someone just to like give it up, like it's not worth the time. I was kind of horrified. I'm like, no, I would never say that because I feel like if you want to write, you can always learn to write. Like for some people, it might be easier. It
Mhm.
might just be a natural talent, but I think you can take classes and you can practice, and just like anything, like a sport or baking or whatever, the more you do it the better you get at it. And so I think if somebody wants to write, they can and they should. And
Mhm.
I would never turn somebody away, ever.
Yeah. No, that's a little harsh, but
I know, right?
yeah. Yeah. Like, no, just quit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
That's
don't have
not
it.
okay.
Walk away.
Yeah. Forget it. So the other topic too about connecting with nature, and we talked before we started recording about how you're going to be in northern Wisconsin later this year. So it sounds like you do have a kind of a connection with nature, and that's something I share with you as
Yes.
well. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I love it. I do a lot of nature writing, and I think that that's actually the best writing that there is because, to really evoke the landscape and connect with it. I always tell people like I go on hikes, and in Michigan we don't have any elevation, but we have forests and whatever. And so I'll go on a walk and there's a real conundrum because I want to write, notes so that I remember when I'm writing about something like this is what the dirt smelled like or this is what it sounded like, but I want to experience it and I don't want to interrupt that experience by taking notes. So it's really tough. And so what I do is I'll like stop periodically, jot some things down, or even talk to text in my phone and then just keep going because I want to immerse in it. And I feel like
yeah,
there's so many studies about how, immersion in nature is your truest self and all the worries and stress of the world melt away when you're in the woods or at the water or whatever it is. And it's so true. And I feel like I want to help people access that. And I feel like I'm my best self when I'm in nature anyway. And so if I can tell those stories on the page in a way that people can be there with me, then we're all better for it. So
sure.
there's a fair number of nature essays in Forest Walk on a Friday. In fact, the title of the collection
Yeah,
is the title of one of the essays. And it's just about, immersing in the world and really being part of the landscape, which I think we don't do enough. And we're all better for it when we do it. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. That's my go-to if I'm really stressed out. Sometimes I take my dogs, sometimes I just go by myself.
Exactly. Yes,
Like,
100%. I'm
yeah.
there with you.
I find a lot of women in midlife, particularly,
Uh-huh.
find things like new things to do. And if I always tell people like if something crosses your mind to do it. Try it.
Yeah,
Like me, like I would love to write a book. Okay, I'm gonna write a book someday. So
do it.
yeah. So what would you tell a woman who's got that thought? Where would she start if she was
I would
thinking about that?
I would say in terms of writing a book, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. Or writing in general maybe would be better.
So there's a couple things. First of all, I think it's really hard to write in isolation, and it's affirming and it's encouraging when you have other writers around you. So if there's any way that you can take part in like an online writing class or a local one, and I offer once a month a free write along on the first or second Sunday of the month. And so people can find that on my website under Write with Lynn. It's one of the options. They can just sign up for the list and they'll get the reminders every month and they can come or not come, but just it's motivating. Like I provide writing prompts, but also people bring their own projects and you see others and you learn about them and you might make friends that you could write with or whatever. There's also the London Writers Salon has 4 writing in community opportunities a day on Zoom, and so like you can sign up for that too. I think that's the first thing, and the second thing is just to start writing and not to judge it because usually it's bad first drafts. Even my first drafts of a novel are yeah, pretty messy, you know?
Hmm.
And so the more you do it, the easier it'll feel and the better the material will be. But you know, you'll meet people if you start, you know, joining writing communities who can then guide you. I think taking classes is great. I teach a bunch of classes through writingworkshops.com, and I also, and they have a lot of other classes too. And I also lead my own programs, which, you know, can be found on my website. I lead writing retreats, sometimes going away for a few days with other writers
Yeah,
to just immerse in a beautiful place and like learn about writing can jumpstart things. So there's a lot of options. And, you know, like you could go to Poets and Writers magazine, pw.org, and there's a ton of retreats and a ton of classes and like, you know, anything. Like I just think start seeing what's out there and do something and then do another thing and see where it takes you.
sure. Yeah, great advice. So, where you mentioned your website, do you want to mention that again and then where people can find your books and
Yes.
everything, all your offerings?
Yes, thank you so much. So lynnegolodner.com is my website. You could just Google my name and it'll be one of the first results that'll come up. And you can find all my books on there and where to buy them. The links are on the books pages. Each book has its own page and all the writing classes, Write with Lynn, my retreats and things like that. I always lead a retreat in Mackinac Island, which is in
Uh,
between the Michigan peninsulas. And so that's every September. I'm leading one in San Miguel, Mexico, in January of
ooh,
2026. I have a few
nice.
spots still in that. Right in the fall of this year. And my books are available wherever you buy books. So
Okay.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and actually Forest Walk on a Friday is the first one that is available in audio. And I narrated that. And then my
Oh,
two, yeah, it's very cool. And my two first novels, Woman of Valor and Cave of Secrets, right now are available in paperback and ebook, but the audio versions will come out in the spring. And my third novel, I Love You, Charlie Tanner, is the name of it. It's coming out in June, and it will be available in all three versions when it launches. So
nice. Yeah. Since that one's coming out, tell us about that one.
yeah, so Charlie Tanner is the protagonist, and she is a 40-year-old woman from northern Michigan, and she left her family behind and followed a guy to a commune in Cape Breton 20 years earlier. And it's really more like a cult than a commune.
Mhm.
And the book opens when her partner dies, and suddenly, and she has to figure out, you know, what's she going to do now? And she ends up in Vermont. I'll just say this. It's definitely more of a cult than a commune, and there's some fallout from that
Uh,
follows her. Maybe it wasn't a heart attack that caused her partner to die. And
oh,
also, there's a hot rabbi. And so that is something a little bit talk about midlife romance. He's a widower
oh, I've
and
never heard those two words together.
hot rabbi.
Hot rabbi.
There's one in this book. So those are the highlights I would say. So very,
Okay.
very suspenseful, but also has the romance part and definitely nature. And one of the big themes in this book is gardening and agriculture. So the commune was like really big on crops and cultivating the land. And that's one way she works through her grief in Vermont. And it's one thing that I love to do is garden. And I'm not as adept as Charlie Tanner is, but I
Yeah,
sort of channeled my future self through her. So yeah.
I love it. I think writing books would almost be kind of a therapy
Oh
in
yeah.
my mind.
Oh yeah, for sure. You
Yeah.
can write out any kind of angst or any kind of character you see in the world. Like I'm putting that person in these pages, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, that could take a whole different turn. Like if I wanted to put like my husband in one and yeah.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll talk about that a different day.
And the big question would be, would he spot it as him or not?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. I'll have to let you
Good
know
luck
about
with that. Yes.
that. What's future plans? Are you going to keep writing books
Yeah.
and do more workshops, retreats? Is
Yeah. So it's interesting. I am continuing with more of the same. My youngest just left the nest, so we are official empty nesters.
ah
And so that is really interesting. And I have started planning the fourth novel, which I'm going to plan more deeply starting next week. Actually, I'm going on a little writing retreat with some friends, and then we'll be
nice.
writing that one. And it's dual timeline, historical fiction, a little bit of supernatural. So it's going to be really challenging.
Yeah.
And actually, it's funny. I wrote a second book in the Woman of Valor series, and I thought it was kind of boring. So I'm sort of thinking maybe I go back to that manuscript and see if I can make it more interesting. So
Oh,
that could be cool too. But yeah, I would
fun.
like to keep writing books and keep putting them out there. And speaking about my books and helping people write their own. So that's,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
amazing. So, listeners, check out her website, lynnegolodner.com. Before we say goodbye, is there any one last little hint or nugget of knowledge you want to share with our listeners?
I just think this whole journey, like especially at midlife, is about learning who you really are and being that person and being courageous enough to be that person. And I just think the sooner you can do it, the better. I've been trying to say yes to things, not the things that were demands in the past, but like, for example, I played tennis when I was a kid, and I've done it like throughout my life, but just sort of like fun. And somebody started a singles team, and I'd never played singles, and I'm like, I'm just gonna say yes. And you know what? I won my first match, and it was like,
Ah,
wow, but it was terrifying. And I just
yeah,
was like, what's the worst thing that happens? So I think challenging ourselves and just saying yes is a really great way to go forward.
that's amazing. Yeah, say yes more often. I love it. Love it. Yeah, I think when we get to this age too, we're like, well, if it doesn't work out, who cares? Like,
Right, exactly.
okay,
What's the
next.
stake? Yeah, I tried
Yeah,
it. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's awesome. Well, Lynn, this has been so amazing. I've just loved this conversation. I feel like we could just keep chatting, but we
do.
have to go. But good luck with the new books, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Kim. I appreciate being on the show.
Thank you for listening to this Midlife with Courage podcast. If you liked what you heard, I would love it if you would leave me a review, or even better, send a link of this episode to a friend. Until next time, take care of your beautiful self.